we'll do some Q&A. So if you want to ask a question about any specific topic that we're covering, feel free to throw it in the chat and we will definitely address it. So heading into the next slide here. Yeah, I'm Alex Dingley. I'm the director of the customer success team at Workzone. And Workzone's a project management software tool that's software as a service, as an online platform. And I oversee the customer success managers, and I wrangle a roster of teams of my own. I've been working with Jonathan and Meredith since the start of their Workzone implementation several years back. So we do the implementation work, we strategize with the teams, and we help them launch and maintain healthy project management systems in our online portal. So a lot of the teams I've worked with have been higher ed. Workzone isn't specific to higher ed, but we probably have several hundred higher ed marketing and alumni and admissions groups, as well as a bunch of foundation groups on campuses that have been using us for a number of years. And we are actually one of the oldest players in the online project management space. We've been around 22 years coming up. So long time running, and we've been watching the business mature for a long time. So we're not the only good game in town, which used to be true, but we are definitely one of the oldest and most tried and true players. So I've got a lot of experience in this world, and I can't wait to share some of these thoughts with you guys. Today, we're going to talk through some different bullets here about project management as a whole. First, we're going to do a little defining, and I want to make sure to clarify that by no means is the stuff we're going to cover today the end-all, be-all definition of project management. Project management can be a lot of things to a lot of people and teams, but we're going to talk through my perspectives that I shared with Jonathan and Meredith, and are the reasons they wanted me to come in and do this presentation. So we'll talk through that. We're going to talk about some best practices. Talk about some best practices in the execution of these project management steps. We'll talk about some challenges that teams in higher ed marketing face commonly, and then how having a platform, whether it's Workzone or Basecamp or Monday or any other players, having any sort of robust platform, how that stuff should help you achieve your goals, whatever they may be. And obviously, we will leave some room for Q&A at the end, and obviously, I'll be happy to follow up if there's anyone out there who's curious about our platform. As Jonathan mentioned, there is a discount for TACCM members when they join Workzone as well. So obviously something that if you're ever interested, if we ever become the right thing for you, we'd love to talk to you about it. So as I was developing all this webinar stuff for us today, because this is not a webinar that we've delivered for other people, this is bespoke to TACCM. This was written for you, and we'll talk a little bit about that process later. But as Meredith and I were talking about it maybe a month ago, she brought up this concept that I wanted to make sure we talked about in the definition of project management. Because one of the things that maybe some folks hear is some sort of skeptical notions, right? And there's plenty of people who might be skeptical about any sort of formal software that does a thing in business. And if you're feeling that skepticism, you might be asking, well, isn't project management just some middle management thing where we've invented work that you can put on top of me doing the real work? And obviously, I'd like to think that it's not, but people who are wondering that might wonder why this process, this project management, should even be important to them, especially if they're a team that's getting their work done already. So the key thing here, and then what I'll focus on for a second, is that project management is more than just getting your work done. It's really the difference between doing it by muscle memory and doing it in your head and documenting a process. And that's sort of the fundamental we're going to talk about. There are teams out there where if they describe their work and said, we don't have any problems getting our work done, we don't need to project management. Well, if I looked at your scenario and said there's no needs to, sort of standardize and modernize that work over time, I might find a way to agree with it. But by and large, I think just about anything can be project managed. So a quick story on this, and then I'm going to talk about the concepts that Meredith and I got into, which were the concepts of intuitively managing our work versus sort of in a documented and managed process managing our work. One of the colleges that we worked with, and I've worked with for a long time, is a school of nursing at a big major university system in the Midwest. They got their work done, and they'd been getting their work done as a marketing team for 20 plus years. So there was no trouble in getting the work done. They didn't necessarily miss deadlines. They didn't necessarily have a lot of mistakes, but they had some frustrations. And the frustrations were they'd been a marketing team that worked together for 20, 30 years. Their team members, some of them had been part of the team for 20 or 30 years, and they'd been doing it intuitively in their heads for all that time. This means every time somebody retired after working there for 30 years, a whole lot of their process knowledge retired with that person. So this was a group that every couple years would see some designer or some copywriter finally say their farewells to the team. And then 6 months later, they're doing a project and nobody knows that there's 5 steps that have to get carried out in this one kind of collateral. So they did run into a lot of frustrations. So that was one big piece of the puzzle for them. They said, I want to come to a platform like this. They saw one of their colleagues in another department at the university using us, and they looked into it and decided, yeah, we want to get a repository of process knowledge built. We want to standardize our work so that we can scale up, so that we can train new employees on how to do the work, so that we can hand off work when we get a little overloaded. So that was one of the key things there. So project management is not just smoke and mirrors invented by middle management so they have something to do. It's a genuinely important and vital documentation process and execution process for making sure that work flows well and scales well. If we talk about the differences between this intuitive process and this managed process, it really comes down to just a couple dimensions. How do we track the work? If you're tracking it in your head, well, it's not really tracking. You're just remembering what you remember. It's manual. If you're doing it in a process, in a system like Workzone or Monday or any of these other platforms, you're going to be doing it in a visual and central way. So it's going to be much more transparent to other people, which means you're not the only person who knows how to do this stuff. How do we measure it? Again, if it's manual and if it's intuitive in your head, it's kind of not measured almost ever. Sometimes it might be if you pour all that information out into a spreadsheet, but that's pretty manual and slows you down. If we're putting it into a system that manages work, it's going to be automatically measured. By the virtue of having dates on things, you're going to see some measurement inherent in that. You're going to see if things are overdue or not. So you don't have to guess or wonder or check an email. How do we improve a process if it's in our heads? Well, frankly, we almost never improve a process that it's in our heads unless there's a problem. So typically, if somebody's got their intuitive, their muscle memory processes that they've been doing as their career for 20 years, if there's a problem with how I do brochures this year, I might fix that aspect of my work, but it's not going to transcend to the other work. If you're doing it in a system, again, like Workzone or something else, you're going to have the opportunity and the visibility to see that this change could apply to other projects, and you're going to be able to, at a wider scale, improve your processes. Same thing goes with learning that. When you have new team members, in an old school methodology, it's knowledge is passed down through oral tradition and apprenticeship, right? This is how people learn the work. They sort of shadow the designers that have been around for a long time. This is great, and it builds camaraderie, and it's great experience, but it's not the most efficient way to transcribe that information, to transmit that information to the new teams and new team members, especially if something suddenly comes up and you have to hand off work. If you're doing it in a managed system, the work's there. The map is there. You just change the names of the players. So how do we scale this stuff? Obviously, scaling up work when demand is increased is never easy. It doesn't matter whether you have a system or not. But if you've ever talked to somebody who manages the work manually or in their heads, and they say, hey, how can we accomplish twice as much next quarter or next semester? The answer is pretty much get another of me. And that's not a scalable solution. You can't just go up 100% in personnel to get twice as much work done. So we have to find ways to schedule and plan and jockey the work around, and you have to get your work into a system in a managed way to see that work so that it can be nudged around. So this is just sort of a fundamental piece that I think will go into all the other work we talk about today that Meredith and I started chatting about a month ago. So the real crux of what got me involved in this webinar here is maybe a year and a half ago, Jonathan and Meredith and I were talking about just concepts, just the human challenges inherent in their work and in their team. And at one point I said something along the lines of, project management isn't hard. It's really not complex. And at the moment, I very off the cuff boiled it down to 4 basic ideas. And again, I'll say this webinar is going to be plenty useful, but I'm not going to say that it's the gold standard of information, that there's no better thought processes on project management, but these hold up and they track pretty well. Project management is nothing more than making a plan and then trying to stick to the plan and knowing when you're off the plan and then adjusting the plan to get back to work and get on the plan again. And if you can do that and rinse and repeat, you are officially project managing your work. How you project manage can vary widely. Could be multiple different kinds of systems that you're using. But at the end of the day, this is really all we're doing. We're just trying to make a plan. It's not a tight blueprint. It's just a plan. It's just a starting point. Put something down and try and make it happen. So as we look a little further into this, as we talk today, we're going to talk a little bit about each of these elements, some of the best practices in making a plan or sticking to a plan. We're going to talk about the challenges that you're probably facing. And this comes from my experience working with teams just like you for years. And then how should a platform like ours or like any platform in our space, how should that help you conquer those challenges? So jumping into the first one of these, we're going to talk about making a plan, which should be easy because you've been doing this work for a long time, I guess. But for some reason, whenever we start launching somebody's Workzone implementation, we often hear that these teams are just struggling to make a project plan. Maybe they've never done it before. One of the things I've noticed is, in the terms of making a plan, it's pretty easy to think of it like a story. If you're going to transcribe all the muscle memory and all the long-standing workflows and collaboration habits of your team into a plan that can be repeated and refined, measured, and handed off and scaled up, you got to find a way to start. And I think of it like storytelling. In fact, I remember seeing a platform where projects were just called stories, which I think is kind of an interesting thing, something from the agency world. So if every project is a story, we just have to tell that story. And any good storyteller will tell you, they normally start with the ending. Know your ending first. So you want to define your goal. How does this project wrap up? What are we aiming for? What's the tangible outcome of a project? If you can identify that clear endpoint, then you've got a good start. Speaking of the start, we have to know where we're starting from. Where are we now? And what needs to happen? What are the deltas that we have to close to get to that endpoint? I say this, that it might sound a little abstract, but this is the difference between if the endpoint is we have our 2024, Dean's newsletter for January wrapped up. If that's the end of the project, the start point could be blank sheet of paper, or it could be, let's just use last year's and punch it up with a bunch of new news and events. So understanding your starting point is really key. Also want to know who's going to be helping. What are the resources we have? Who's the players in this? So when we've got those things, we can move into this defining what's the steps along the way. Also, real quick question. Jonathan, do you guys see my mouse moving when I move it?
Yes, sure do.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. Sort of
either that or there's a fly on my screen that
also fair. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you want to define the points along the way. What are the steps of this process? Different projects are going to have different kinds of steps and different amounts of steps, and you sort of do have to pick your starting point there. And obviously knowing what maybe could go wrong, what could get in the way of this, what are the factors that we're going to have to think about? Are we going to have to get approval from somebody in senior leadership who's going on vacation? Well, okay, then we're going to have a challenge unless we get this on their desk before then. So these are some of the best practices in making a solid project plan. What makes it difficult to do that? Well, a few things. As we look into the challenges, and again, this is all coming from experiences we've heard and seen and tried to help people overcome, there's a lot of lack of clarity around what is a step in a process? What should be a task versus what doesn't need to be a task? And that's something people who are coming from these older intuitive lack of, process worlds, they really struggle with that. As we look further, I noticed people are also having a really hard time guesstimating, well, how long should I give us to do this task? What's the right amount of time for copy revised or proof approved, things like that. And sometimes it can just be really darn hard to edit the work. This mostly comes in from the folks that we see who were using spreadsheets and using old, antiquated, homegrown, SharePoint systems that somebody in IT had built for them. If it's not designed and bespoke to project management, it's going to be a real rough time sort of jockeying tasks and timelines around. So these can be real big challenges for anybody who's trying to, make changes to a plan or even just to build the plan from scratch in the first place.
Alex, can I ask a clarifying question on that second point?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
So when you say how to estimate due dates, I think there's also, and maybe you're hinting at this, but I think there's also sometimes a difference of understanding between how long the work is going to take versus like how I'm working on I'm going to work on this project for 2 hours and it's going to take me 2 hours to build this email. But in reality, I don't have a 2-hour segment today. So it's actually going to be a 4-day due date. So I think there's also some struggle there of, I can do this work in 2 hours, but I don't have 2 hours until Friday. So
no, you're making a great point. And that's absolutely something that I want to get us into. Now, obviously, in our brief webinar today, I'm not going to go all the way down every rabbit hole of things like workload versus duration planning, but I'm absolutely going to touch on it in the next slide. So, So obviously, people that come in sometimes do struggle with that. And as Jonathan pointed out, it can be either difficult to understand if you've never had to think about it, or even if you know what you're trying to do, it's just difficult to get it figured out. And that's totally fair. And a lot of these challenges do come from having a lack of any formal project management experience or expertise or training in the subject. So hopefully today's sort of primer on these subjects can help folks come out of the dark on certain things that can at least put them in the conversations where they can learn more about what they'll need to do when they're ready to do it. If we're looking at how does a project management software help us do this better, let's take a look here. Sort of when I think about any robust project management software, and again, not talking strictly about my own, we expect that you're going to have some easy ways to build projects. If I'm doing something off the cuff, or if I'm using a project template, sort of a cookie cutter for that job, any project management software these days should absolutely provide you a standardized way of knocking out new projects, again, from scratch or from templates. And templates, if the name doesn't betray the concept enough, it's really just saying, here's my standard boilerplate for how am I going to get that project plan started. Obviously, you'll vary from there. Once you get those projects out and in flight, you're going to have to make changes because real life is going to happen. People that came from managing things in spreadsheets, people that came from these homegrown systems or no system at all, when needs change or when needs expand or priorities pivot, they're often stuck because just any changes to the timeline can be so frustrating to manipulate. So you definitely, when you come to a system like ours, it's just a couple of clicks to move dates around, make changes, add tasks, remove tasks, reassign things. It's all bespoke for that purpose. As we get into the building of timelines, one of the things we'll start to think about is, if we have a process that is a daisy chain of events, if I have to do my creative work and it's kickoff, creative, review, revisions, production, delivery, that's a standard straight through workflow that you can link together with dependencies. These are standard in pretty much every platform these days, and they're going to allow you to make it so that if I move one task, the next ones after that just slide over as well. So we'd be able to collapse and expand projects and tasks really quickly and really easily. And as we get into the Q&A, I'm happy to bring up my demonstration site where I can show off some of those processes in my fake projects there. So dependencies are a real key piece. Again, regardless of the platform, if you're not using dependencies, you're shortchanging yourself on some flexibility and some luxury there. And the real piece to this that I think I talk about the most, and I'll mention this a couple times in today's presentation, is software is not enough for most teams. If you're new to project management, or if you're just in a team that's populated with, humans, you're going to run into challenges. And having a partner that can co-manage this, this onboarding and the longer arc relationship, who's responsible and experienced and attentive to your needs and actually engages with you, it's going to go miles. Because my team's been in the business 20 some years. We've seen many customers stick around for a long time, and we've seen many customers flame out with our platform after flaming out with 2 previous ones. And it was never the platform that was the problem. It was processes, or it was organizational issues or culture change issues that really got in the way. Having somebody who can work with you, understand your needs and process, and even hold your feet to the fire when necessary, that's absolutely invaluable. Trying to think if there's any other points to this piece that I wanted to make sure of. I think, coming back to Jonathan's question, when we talk about building out our project plans, different teams have truly different needs about what they're tracking in their project management work. Since I'm tackling mostly the basic concepts of project management here, I wasn't necessarily going to go way down the rabbit hole in this, but I'll give a primer on the idea of what Jonathan was questioning. If we build a project plan and we say, I'm going to work on the copy for 5 days, we're not saying I'm going to spend 5 8-hour days writing some copy. We're saying I'm a person who has 900 other things going on. I can't be expected to have a single point in time at which I'm going to come to this project and touch it and finish it all in one stroke. So typically when we do project planning, every task is going to have a range of time, a due date range, saying, hey, between Monday and Thursday, I'm going to get around to writing this copy. And it might take me an hour, but I'm just giving myself a window of opportunity. So whenever we talk about project planning, most folks at the very basic level are really only thinking about durations or windows of opportunity. Some folks are trying to do capacity planning. Hey, how much bandwidth does my team have? And in those situations, much to the point Jonathan was sort of asking around, many teams are going to say, in that 4 days, there is 1 hour of work for this task that needs to get done. And if you stack up all the other 900 things that are going on simultaneously, and you have good work value guesses distributed over good durations and windows of opportunity, you can get a really clear picture of who's overloaded and who's underutilized in your team. Then you can make really smart decisions to help jockey things around, and it can be really, really powerful. Not everybody comes in wanting and needing and ready to tackle that stuff, but really robust platforms, again, this is one where it's definitely not all our competitors, but the really robust platforms like ours absolutely let you do that too. We let you have durations and workload planning and capacity measurement, as well as time tracking and comparison to all of that stuff. So definitely something that if that's on somebody's mind because they're trying to grow their team and they want to use data to demonstrate that they're over capacity, we're a great choice. There's lots of choices that can do it, but yeah, it definitely takes some thought and some work and iteration, as Jonathan can attest. You're not going to start using a project management software on a Monday, and by Tuesday have thoughtful and accurate portrayals of all the workload for all of your different project types in a couple of days. You're probably going to be guessing if you've never done it before. And once you get a couple guesses under your belt, the guesses, you can start to look at the data and see what's better and see what's accurate and make the guesses better. So yeah, glad you brought that up. So these are the basics, right? We've got making a plan, which definitely has a few challenges. And if you've got a good platform, potentially like ours, it should make it really easy to build projects. Whether you're building them from scratch or from templates or from imports of other systems, you should be able to edit those projects at the start and when they're in flight. Responsive timelines with dependencies are going to make your life a little easier in terms of slipping and sliding the dates. And having a partner, someone like me or one of my team members, to guide you and hold your hand through the process is absolutely invaluable for most teams. So looking at the second bullet of this sort of basic principle, sticking to a plan. It sounds pretty simple, but I assure you it is not. You got to have some great visibility. It wouldn't be much of an issue if you were only talking about one project, but in all likelihood, your teams are managing dozens or more projects at any given moment. That workload conversation betrays the same problem, right? It's not one project I'm worried about. It's the 37 projects we have due before the end of the next month. Given the potential to need to look across a huge body of work, you have to be able to look at everything and get a bird's eye view, or zoom into one thing and just focus on it, or maybe look at a cross section of the work. So having, real visibility to work is just not that possible if you're managing it in your head, unless you can remember all those details, or doing it on a spreadsheet. Then you have to come up with some clever filters. Having accountability for yourselves and your team is really important as well. All the collaborators in your team, they need to keep track of where they fit into the big picture, and you have to make it easy for them. They're not going to want to scour through a big status board of yours or a big master spreadsheet of yours, or look through all your post-it notes and inboxes. So you have to find a way to make it easy to show them, here's what's yours, here's what somebody else's, here's how it all fits together. We also need some prioritization. Not everybody uses formal priority. This is top, middle, lower priority, but having some way to indicate that these jobs are important. That way we can, say what's now and what's next. And if something new and hot comes in, which we all know happens, knowing what stuff can't get bumped versus what stuff can get bumped is really, really incredibly important as you try and stick to the plan, because knowing which jobs have drop dead hard dates at the end of them versus which jobs have soft dates of it'd be nice to get that done by March, but if it takes till June, we'll be okay. Knowing that and having data labels that help us understand it, that's a really key piece as well. What's hard about all this? Well, it's, pretty straightforward. If you don't have a single source of truth, one platform to sort of rule them all and show you all the work so that you can, as I was sort of saying before, look across a big body of work, expand it to see all the projects, or just zoom into one. If you don't have that visibility, it's really, really hard to know, what's going on with any one thing without having to look at everything, scour that list. All of that time you waste, looking through inboxes and post-it notes, or scanning a big spreadsheet, or stopping your colleagues in the hallway to ask them what's up with such and such. That's time you're wasting that should and could be spent on the collateral, on the creative material itself. So we definitely want to get you to a single source of truth. Whatever platform in the world it is, try and just use one thing and use it well. Again, in the same vein, if we don't have a single source of truth, if we don't have a platform, or even if your methodology doesn't have good sort of ownership indication, who's in charge of this step, you don't have clear ownership of the work, it's really hard to know, who do I go to for a question about this? It also might be really hard to know, am I the only one working on this? And we sometimes hear about people having mid-air collisions on projects. Oops, I thought you were doing the copy, or I thought I was doing the copy, and so did I think I was doing the copy. So you have multiple people putting the same material together. Definitely a huge waste of time. It's all important to have that unified and clarified. If we're constantly juggling hot jobs and the newest hot job comes in, it's I guess it's sort of an everybody solo sort of moment. We have this everything's on fire, nothing is back burner ever problem. In any team like this, I think some of the key pieces to this part of the puzzle are that we absolutely need to use data labels that are going to make it very clear but also maybe have some sort of intake funnel where we can get priorities established and know what's hot before we get the job started. So if you're in a robust platform, you should be able to see really flexible and customizable views. As I was explaining a second ago and sort of illustrating, something that lets you jump down into one project, back over to another, or look at all the projects, or look at a cross-section, that's super valuable. So any major platform like mine, definitely going to make it really easy to slice and dice and jump across different projects. You don't want to have to manually hold people accountable, like scraping together a hot sheet for every individual team member. Huge waste of time. By the time we've done it, the data is not true anymore, probably, because it takes sometimes hours to put this stuff together. And by the time you do that, some of the work might be finished, or some of the work might be due at a different time. So we want to have automated accountability. And in a system like mine, you're going to have automated to-do lists that are instantly scraped from the project plans we build and automatically emailed to us so that the system's proactively helping us stay ahead. Powerful labeling and filtering, like I was saying, you absolutely need to have some way of saying which jobs are print jobs versus digital jobs versus event jobs, maybe which ones are, meaningful to this, dimension of, strategic initiatives for the university or college system. These sorts of data labels inherently help us prioritize because we can filter for the stuff we care about. And in Workzone, we have all of those abilities and just a column called priority. If you just want to use a priority one, you can just list jobs by their priority and sort them out. Obviously, the workload stuff was something I was going to mention in here, but we've sort of already touched on it. So if we're trying to stay ahead of the plan most of the time, one of the next things is you have to have a system that can help you understand how and, well, more importantly, when you fell off the plan. So knowing what didn't go right is really key here. And the tricks to this, it's all about the best practices or spending your time wisely. For teams that have finite resources, but seemingly infinite collateral requests to fulfill, it's super important to maximize the time you spend on the actual collateral. This means you can't spend all your time scraping together hot sheets and stuff from Post-it notes and emails. You also can't let work fall through the cracks. So we have to find a sweet spot in here to know, okay, here's what's going on with the work. Now we realize this is late. We have to react to it. And having clear expectations and business rules around how we react to those problems is absolutely vital. When teams have a lack of consistency in tracking their work, and when they don't establish simple, if this is late, here's what we do, rules, that sort of wild, wild west culture typically also coincides with stuff like missed deadlines and work needing to be redone, and sometimes rush fees because now we're scrambling to get something done at the 11th hour. So trying to save time, hassles, and money, expectations are a really big part of that. And what I'm talking about here is saying to your team, like, I expect you to complete your tasks on time. And if you can't, I expect you to communicate about it. And if we need to push something out, I expect that to get pushed out and not just be languishing in a 5-day-old or 25-day-old status. So having clear business rules that help you keep the data tidy, very important to this. I'm not saying that everyone in the team needs to suddenly become a formal project manager, because in a system like ours or anything else, it's not that hard to update stuff. Just saying that we have to hold ourselves accountable and set expectations about how we engage with our system. If we do all that well, we shouldn't have that many meetings. Meetings can be an important part of the team culture, but they can also be a huge time suck. If you're involving everybody in a team meeting, going around the room, where are we on all this? Chances are there's a bunch of people that are only sharing information and contributing to that meeting for a few minutes. That means every other minute of that hour-long meeting was time they didn't get to spend being creative or putting collateral out. So if we can find ways to reduce the amount of minutes everybody spends saying, where are we with this? Where are we with that? Where are we with this? We can put all that time back into the creative work. So instead of having daily or weekly status meetings, having a unified system of record, letting you, really leverage the data and leverage the value of a platform that automates this sort of information sharing. It's a great way to save time, speed yourselves up, and get more done with less. If the information in the system is fresh and accurate, you can focus. If you do have meetings, you can make those meetings about the strategy and the creative content and actually really talk about what are we going to do and do better instead of saying, where are we with this? The stuff that's tricky about that is, well, again, stale information. It's the biggest issue we hear about from teams that are coming from a manual process. By the time you've cobbled together your hot sheets for everybody, the stuff isn't necessarily true anymore. All the details you scraped together 5 hours ago are now out of date because half of that stuff got finished and some of it got shuffled. Bad habits and team culture are real too. Have to admit it. We can't just pretend that all of this is happenstance and software issues. It's definitely humans. Sometimes the problem is us. And, I think the real issue is we have a bunch of right brain people in these teams trying to get stuff that needs left brain attention done. And that's a huge challenge for lots of teams. So if we, can all agree that working smarter is worth some habit changes, then we can get there. Sometimes that's easier said than done, though. A lot of teams really struggle with the sort of the shifting of culture and the sort of getting everybody shoulder to shoulder and in it to win it. And that really comes in to play with the next challenge here, which is some of the people who are in charge of running projects for a team aren't in charge of the team. Maybe they don't have authority over any of the players, or they don't have authority over somewhat removed external players, the folks that might be approving all the collateral because they're, the dean. So whenever we have problems of authority, again, there's no magic bullet for this. No software in the world is going to solve that for us. But this is something where, if you don't feel like it's natural to be somebody who's an executive assistant, or maybe a student worker is the one running the projects, or maybe you're just the graphic designer who's been in the team the longest and now you're the de facto traffic manager. If those are the realities and you don't have authority over anyone, it's a big challenge. This is another place where, working with a team that understands this challenge can be really helpful. These are definitely the sticking points I hear about the most in terms of, trying to be on top of whether stuff is falling behind. So bringing in a system, well, it should make it easy to update the info. We already talked about being easy to update, but what I'm talking about here is we need to remove excuses. If you want fresh and accurate updates on all your projects and all your tasks, you can't make it hard for a bunch of creative people to go in and check a box. Platforms like mine, we give you several ways to update that task. You can go into the task list. You can do it from a to-do list that's automatically scraped. We'll also send those to you in an email, and you can mark them complete from the body of an email or from your smartphone. So trying to remove excuses of why we didn't update that is sort of a key element to most platforms like ours. I don't know if everyone has so many ways as we do, but everyone's got more than one way for somebody to update their task. Having real-time alerts and automated reporting, like I was talking about before, absolutely integral to this. Having status reports that show you which jobs are suddenly late, super vital. Having real-time notifications of, hey, you're up. Hey, you're next. These are vital as well to make sure stuff doesn't fall behind. But when it does, being able to see which things are late on your to-do list, and even communicate it through comments. Hey, I think we're going to fall behind on this. Let's get ahead of it. Commenting through the systems as well is going to be really, really powerful. And the last piece here is going to come back to us again, the humans. Rigorous coaching. This is something my team talks about constantly. It's not necessarily built into every one of the platforms that compete with us, so maybe that's why I'm talking about it. But it should absolutely be involved in everyone's process. Whether it's you or your boss rigorously coaching you, there absolutely should be somebody helping nail down what are our primary objectives? What are the roadblocks to getting us there? And what are we willing to do to overcome that? Do we have culture problems? Okay, what are we willing to do with our team to overcome that culture problem? How do we win over the holdouts on our, new process or our new platform? That's not something that everyone in a creative team is sort of instinctively wired to do. And that's another reason why my team exists. We can show up and give you the right questions to ask. We've got a million hours of experience, I'm sure, in the last decade, talking people through culture change and process change. And we've heard every excuse in the book. And for the most part, we know the counter arguments for all of it. So that's some stuff that tends to come in pretty handy. So if I look at the last of these 4 principal bullets, as we come up to sort of the, we're running slower than I anticipated, so I apologize for that. But as we come up to the end of our time today, I want to make sure we get in this last one. How do we adjust our plans and get back on the plan? Well, first and foremost, we can't just focus on, what went wrong. We have to always be looking at how do we keep moving forward? How do we get back on the plan? So while we want to learn from our hiccups and mistakes, maybe just journal those, and then let's get this job done so that we can move on, knowing how far off track we are, and then what do we do about it? Maybe we're going to compress time, to fit all of the work that's needed into the now shorter amount of time we have because we're late. You either have to be in control of the space-time continuum or nimble enough to jockey some stuff around in your tasks. Sometimes we're going to shrink down a task deadline here. We might even reassign some work. Saying, well, I've got somebody over here who's, on lower priority stuff. Let me pull them in and spread this work out a little bit. So being able to do those things is a great way to keep the work flowing. And no matter what change you make, if you're speeding up a job because now we have to compress it, or if we're reassigning the work, we absolutely want to reset team priorities internally. And we definitely want to reset expectations with our stakeholders. Hey, you didn't get back to us in time for that deadline you asked us to meet. So we need to, renegotiate some due dates here. Really common stuff. The challenges in doing all this are pretty straightforward as well. If you're using disparate systems, not going to have an easy time of it. If you have to chase all over for updates, if you have to cobble together info, it's never going to be easy to manipulate all of the moving pieces. One of the other pieces too is it's not just about maybe use different ways of tracking different projects. If your way of tracking the work isn't also the way you communicate with the team and the stakeholders, it's already slower inherently. For Jonathan's team, or for Meredith and Jonathan's team at Dallas College, they have the ability to manipulate the project plans in the platform that they then can use to send the communiques about, hey, this was late, now we're readjusting. So they're not going anywhere else. They don't have to go anywhere else to make changes and make it known. Lack of bandwidth and visibility is a huge one. So this comes back to what Jonathan was asking about earlier. If we don't have a guesstimate of who's overloaded, who's underutilized, it's really hard to know who we can rope in to spread the work around. Workzone and lots of other platforms do make it possible to have that workload data. I think it's potentially maybe the easiest in hours, but I've seen other ones that do a pretty good job as well. So, knowing who can stand in for the work that's stuck really comes down to knowing who doesn't have too much on their plate or who has low priority stuff on their plate that we can pull in. And sort of the last bullet on here is less technical and more human. It's just, honestly, everybody, this is just hard sometimes. And, human to human, once in a while, just give yourself a little grace on stuff that does not go great and figure out a way to say, all right, let's collect ourselves and figure out how we get somewhere from here. Because I don't ever want to make it sound like there's always an answer, because sometimes stuff's just too hard. We'll figure it out as we go. Looking at how the platforms can solve for this, having everything under one roof, the project layouts, the communication, the status updates, that's the key. Being able to do it all in one system, being able to flex your timelines and live update the folks that are involved, really, really powerful. And if you're going to be swapping out a bunch of work to somebody else, being able to mass update it, that's one of the things that our system does particularly well. And I know a lot of systems can do it in the other platforms, but selecting a bunch of things that were assigned to Mark and then reassigning them to Sally, it's just a few clicks. So being able to jockey that work around and push it to somebody else is absolutely vital when that's the right move. Again, if any of this is all manually done, none of it's easy. So I guess at this point, the last things last are just to sort of talk through some final points. Looking at, if I go back to our initial slide, let's see here. Oh, no, here's my takeaway slide. Forgive me. Forgot that I built that slide. Project management is vital for continuity and process improvement. It's at the heart of it, it's not complex. It's just a simple set of steps that we want to get really good at drilling. There's plenty of challenges. Some of them are technical, some of them are organizational, some of them are human. But the right tools and the right guidance are absolutely going to make a huge difference here. Now, I realize we did not go as fast as I thought we'd go, so I didn't give us nearly as much time as I'd wanted to for Q&A, but I do want to make sure that we touch on any questions and any, oh, thanks, McLennan folks. Yeah, if there's any questions coming in from the chat, see, we've got Yvette's gathering stray cats from earlier in the call from when we started. If Yvette's still here, because I'm not seeing all the names on this tiny window, is there any further comment around cats that need to be gathered and herded? Any questions or insights needed? Because it is something we talk about a lot in my team.
Not really. It's just making sure that everybody gets in there. I think that's what I mean by it. So, it's very poignant that you say that. We have our own platforms in our own mind to organize. And I'm very much like everybody else. I have my own system and I stick with it and I work with it. And then getting everybody involved with it. Sometimes it's like overwhelming because it's like, oh, that's real intense, Yvette. That's a lot there. But it's just making sure everybody's coming in to, that system and understanding where at least my brain is and trying to get everybody's brain in there too.
That makes sense. It's one of the things, and again, I know you're not necessarily asking me to solve that, because that is a challenge that it sounds like you've sort of accepted. This is just a challenge in how we work, right? But I think one of the things that you could always ask in a team like that is, what doesn't go great when stuff doesn't go right? Do you have team members that mostly get stuff done, but are commonly missing this or that? Do we have stuff where things are not getting done on time? Do we have folks that are working late when they wish they weren't? If we have anything that's showing up as a sort of tangible problem, the real questions we can ask ourselves is, okay, well, we've got a problem. Maybe my graphic designer is always in a scramble and never gets home before 6:30 at night. That sounds like a solvable thing. If we can find a way to get on the same page about what is a system that I'd want to use. Maybe you have to compromise on your, as you described, sort of intense level of detail or whatever it was you were saying they might feel as intense. If you could find a way to say, well, maybe I do this really intense tracking of work and you do a really generic tracking of work. If we meet in the middle, maybe we can get a little more unification, and maybe that could turn into less scramble. Again, I think there's more nuances, and I'd want to ask more questions. I'd definitely be open to talking to you if you are seeing that as something that you think is worth solving down the road. I'm sure there's a path, because it's definitely a thing that's very common in the folks that we now work with, is that it came from places like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing. Anyone else have thoughts or questions that they want to throw out there, or curiosities, or you want to stump the success manager?
I think I'll just echo, Alex, kind of what you were saying about getting everybody into the same system. I think,
Yeah.
as we've talked with Meredith and you and so forth, that's been a struggle sometimes for us, moving from no project management system to a system, and getting people away from, well, I'm going to email people and I'm going to message them on Teams, and I'm going to, maybe your Slack is your weapon of choice, but whatever, if you're not putting the comments and updating things in the system, it does slow down everything. Because even as someone who's, on the creative side, I have to then go hunt. It's like, okay, well, which chat did I put that in? Which email did I put that in?
You're absolutely right. And Jonathan, you just caused me to remember the thing that I was trying to remember to say to Yvette, but it went in my brain and out of my brain. If you're in a team where not everybody is feeling the vibe and on the same page about why we ought to get in the same system or just do things the same way, some pretty simple questions that I typically find come up with a problem. And it's, hey, you know how we don't have a system where you can tell me what's going on? And you know how every time I want to know what's going on, I swing by your cubicle, maybe 6 times a day, maybe 10 times a day, and ask you, hey, stop what you're doing. Can you update me on that thing that you aren't working on right now, but that you worked on 4 days ago? Can you just tell me where we are with that? Because I need to know right now about the thing you're not thinking about. So that interruption, multiplied out over your week, every time you have to give a human-to-human status update, that's got to be annoying for somebody who's trying to be in the creative space. I know as a creative person, if I'm in the middle of working on something and someone asks me like a logistical question, my brain short circuits for a second, and then I have to figure out how to get over to their place and answer that. And then I have to figure out how to get back to the place I was trying to be. That is a huge bummer for anyone who's in a creative flow. So if you have people that are saying, nah, I'd rather just keep doing my wild, wild west routine here, you might want to ask them, like, would you like to be interrupted less so you can just be creative? Because if you can just literally check a box on a screen for me, I don't have to bother you at all. That literally has been enough to convince, I don't know, dozens of teams in the last 12 years that I've been doing this to sort of get on board. Like just oh, wait, you can stop bothering me. No one's going to be hovering around my cubicle. Sold. And again, it really depends on how big a team, right? It depends on how big your team is. It depends on how much or how little of a mind meld you all have. But that mind meld isn't as mindy as you think it is. It's literally you're slacking each other and you're chatting each other and you're asking each other questions, all of which are interruptive, all of which break flow. So yeah, if you want to be able to make the flow last longer and be more intense, you want to find a way to stop having to interrupt each other.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jonathan, thank you for bringing that back into my mind.
It looks like Kathy has her hand up.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, I was going to say, we did a breakout session in our last marketing meeting, and one of the comments on processes was the fact that we need everyone to be doing things all the same versus you can all be in one system, but invariably everybody wants to do it differently or their way. Or, yeah, I know we're doing this, but can you also comment to me and, CC this other person and stand on one leg and clap, clap, clap. And I mean, even if you're in the same system, you still get the variations of, and that was one of the things we commented in our meeting, is that we just needed some consistency. But it's amazing how hard that is to wrangle in, everybody wants to do just a little different.
Yeah, you're not wrong. That's a very common problem. Now, depending on the team, there may or may not be a really easy way to solve it. And also depending on the platform you happen to be using, there may or may not be a really easy way to solve it. So Kathy, can you share what do you all use?
We use Workzone, baby.
Oh, you're in the Workzone team. Sorry, I'm just seeing a first name, so I'm not.
Yep, she's on our team.
Oh, great. Yeah. All right. Well, then, so this is one of those chances where I'm going to go yell at your admins. No, I was kidding.
Now, do you have one of those things? Do you have something that reaches out of a laptop and slaps somebody on the hand? Says,
Oh,
no,
right. Yeah.
we can't do it. That's what we
Zapper
need.
keyboard. We need the Zapper keyboard. Yeah, no, that's that's a really great point. And honestly, in a team as big as yours, right? In Dallas College, it's a big team, a lot of different players. Sometimes it takes a lot of iterations of conversations to start getting people to be won over to just the basics of like, no, like, let's use this template and actually use it and not just create stuff from whole cloth. And if we're trying to do things through a document approval process, as opposed to just commenting, hey, is this document okay? Yeah, that can take some challenging conversations. That conversation, that bullet about authority is really the key here.
Yeah. I mean, we're
Sometimes-
doing a great job. I wouldn't go back to anything else. I mean, Workzone has
that's
just,
good.
I mean, it's a lifesaver. And I'm
Oh.
just making an off comment about that, you know.
No, it's a super valid comment because seriously, even in the teams that use Workzone fantastically well, and you guys are in that, you're in that category of like, you guys are using it well and you're using it really strong and really heavily for years and years. But there's no perfect usage of any platform, right? There's going to be stuff that does not fit the mold. There's going to be stuff that, creates headaches. And that's definitely some of the stuff. When you get into a position where people's team reviews can involve things like, okay, well, let's talk about your consistency in your execution of your work, and you can bring it back to the, here's how we do our work in Workzone, and here's how you do your work in Workzone. It sort of becomes development conversations with individuals. If you can bring it into that place and say, like, look, we have a standard, and we have a standard for a reason. You're not following the standard. Sometimes, and again, I'm not trying to say we just hold people's jobs over their heads to make them fill out their task list the way I asked them to. But the reality is, if they're not doing things in a consistent way that the team has outlined is important, they're not holding up their end of the bargain. So it becomes that conversation, right? This is where if the people in charge of the platform aren't in a place of authority over all the players, I typically say you got to go up the chain to go over. You say, like, I got to go up to leadership so that I have the backing of leadership when I say, we all agree this is important, and here's what that means. This is a mandate from on high. So, but no, I mean, it's good that you call that out. I think sharing that feedback in and around your team and through us is important. So yeah, thanks for speaking up about it. If you can just point to the users, I will zap them. Any other thoughts? Any questions? I know we're over the hour here, so we probably should wrap up and let y'all get back to your days. But if anything else, I'm happy to chat for another minute. All right. Well, very
Thanks
good
so much,
stuff.
Alex.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for having me. I really appreciated the chance to chat with you all about this stuff. And like I said, Meredith, I'm really thankful you guys involved me on all your help getting this stuff going.
Thank you.
If you can, I know you recorded this, Jonathan, if you could send me a link to the recording, I'd love to be able to take notes from it and just sort of have an offline copy so I can, improve for future iterations of stuff like this.
Yeah, be glad to.
Appreciate it. And then obviously, Meredith, we'll catch up on our next quarterly and we can chat about this. If you have anything in the meantime, you know where to find me.
Yeah, I wrote down a couple new things, and I'm like, you know what? I probably actually need to have better conversations about these two things.
Oh, awesome. I can't
Always
wait to
learning.
talk. Yeah. I'll double check on our calendar. You feel free to send them my way, and I'll just put them in the agenda.
Okay, we'll do.
Awesome. All right, y'all have a
Thank
good
you so
day.
much
Okay?
for helping us out.
Thanks, everybody.
Anytime.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.